Hey there, and welcome to an episode of Selling AI. Today, we're diving with Molly Sustak in all things revenue enablement. Molly is an absolute dynamite sales leader, spending a few years at Showpad before leading enablement for the past 3 years at Sedna, a Series C shipping communications platform. In today's episode, Molly and I are going to talk about how reps should view enablement going forward, training, as well as career growth in the age of AI, as well as how the future of sales enablement as a function will be shaped, really now that we have the ability to extract key insights from every one of our sales conversations. All right, let's get into it. Hey, Molly, thank you so much for being here with us today to talk about the future of sales enablement. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Warren. Super excited to be here.
Would you give us a bit about your awesome background and an underappreciated but absolutely fundamental role on the sales team? And then tell us about what you're focused on today.
I always said I was not going to go in sales. My dad works in sales and he was always on his phone. He was always traveling. And I'm like, I don't want to be like that. Turns out, spoiler alert, ended up in sales, loved it. But actually, my real passion was teaching people how to sell. So, not actually selling myself. So, that's kind of how I got my start in enablement. I started on the BDR side, then started building out BDR enablement, and now have moved over to full revenue enablement. I know the whole market is shifting now towards revenue enablement. So jumped on that bandwagon and actually most recently jumped on an even bigger bandwagon. So I am now leading our RevOps and revenue enablement team at Sedna. And I think this is a really interesting shift where we're seeing a lot of companies starting to team up their enablement and RevOps team. And I think especially in this new AI world, this is going to be even more prevalent across the industry.
It's really interesting. We'll dive into that specific topic in a bit because it really is like a fascinating combination where the synergies lie and why it hasn't been done before. But we'll get into that a little bit later. So that's awesome. Appreciate that dive in. Tons of experience. Molly is a go-to when it comes to revenue enablement along the way. So let's dive in. Can you talk about what sales enablement was like 5 years ago when you were first doing, let's say, BDR enablement, shifting into like rep enablement, compared to what it looks like today? What's been like the change and the dynamic that you've seen?
So it's so interesting because I have even been talking about enablement even further along with that. So as we talked about, I got my start at Showpad, which is a sales enablement platform. So as a BDR, I was calling into people when, by the way, sales enablement wasn't even a word yet. It could have been like commercial excellence or commercial enablement. So they didn't really have the sales enablement word. A lot of times it was like this traditional sales training where you would go sit in a conference room for 8 hours in a day with your handouts, right? And that was the training. And then everybody went away and it was like, great, job done. And then you had, the marketing folks who were creating content and they were kind of just throwing it over the wall to sales reps, hoping that they were using it. There was no way to get insights. So people really had no idea if that, what they were creating was actually working. Was it resonating with the buyers? And what was actually happening? So sales and marketing were kind of just going at each other because it was kind of the blame game there. Then you had like the rise of all of this sales tech and sales enablement tech that started to drill into some of this, change the game a little bit. And, we evolved a bit. We have our LMS systems, right? With, we can do some training online. We can do quizzes and whatnot, maybe gamify it a little bit. And same with the sales enablement tech from the marketing perspective of like understanding what buyers are engaging in. So if you think about like digital sales rooms, for example, but I actually think the biggest part is that it used to just be incredibly manual. So I remember I used to spend, like, I kid you not, hours, Warren, building out like something so simple as a call scorecard. And again, this is more like not that older traditional enablement. This is when we were starting to try to do this reinforcement piece. But I would spend so long building it. By the way, I built one of these the other day and I used AI and it took me 5 minutes. And so it's a huge shift, and it was about as good as I could have created, if not maybe better, because I used like a custom GPT that we created with all of our methodologies and information about our company in it. So like I could probably do that if I spend 5, 6 hours, but in 5 minutes, I have the exact same thing with the exact same quality. That allows me to then focus on way more high effort ROI things versus, creating content and whatnot. So I think this is the biggest shift, especially for like a lot of enablement teams are supporting 700 people as one person or really small teams. Like, how do you scale? And AI is actually that piece that's going to help us scale.
That's like crazy. And in the scenario, I talk about this a lot where there are like major shifts that happen, and then it doesn't seem like there's been a shift. Like it always seems like it's been that way. I wasn't in sales 10 years ago. I never even contemplated a world where most sales training that ever has happened has been bring your sales team into a room, conference room, maybe once a quarter for 8 hours and just do presentations and these types of things. Sales enablement has always been like sales enablement 2.0 that the show pads of the
Mhm.
world kind of showed us. Like, we get to a good question, like, when you were calling in as like a BDR initially into selling sales enablement to teams, how were they talking about it when you were doing this? Like, and how were you trying to shift it? What was you were way ahead of this problem to get to sales enablement 2.0, and then we'll talk about sales enablement 3.0 throughout this podcast.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think most of them didn't even realize they had a challenge. I know you and I have talked about email a lot as well, where, in the business world, we all think about email as, oh, we're just so used to using Gmail or Outlook, and that's just how it is. And like, does it annoy us sometimes? Yes. But it's like, whatever, we get on with it and it's fine. But I think it's actually a lot of trying to get them to realize that there is a huge challenge around it, and actually there's a better way of doing things. And so it was a lot of education, to be honest. A lot of time, a lot of education, a lot of discovery to really understand what was going on. And I think the biggest thing for them was actually understanding ROI. So really understanding, okay, I've created this training, but what did it actually achieve? Did people actually complete it? And then what was, like, how do I measure later down the line? Did that affect performance later on? And whatnot. And then same with the marketing content, like how did it resonate with buyers? Because as soon as you can start to see those things that are resonating, you can start to create more of it, which is a way better time investment than, maybe a case study that you created that, from an industry that nobody's selling into and nobody's looking at. What a waste of time to spend hours upon hours, building out this content. So I think it's a lot of education to really get them to realize that they had this challenge because everybody's just been doing it that way. And I think this happens a lot. It's the same with AI, right? Everybody's a little bit scared to jump on the bandwagon, and the people who are actually using it are starting to build out these business cases of like, if you don't use this, you're going to fall behind because look at what I'm doing in such a small amount of time. And now I have so much other time to actually focus on the things that are most important.
Interesting. That's a common pull in like shifts in market, right? Where you go to someone, you're like, you're investing a lot of money in this particular like area. Let me give you the ability to measure that. But like the ability to measure it comes along with a new way of doing it, right? So like it's the ROI almost drags you to a new process, which is like kind of interesting. That's what you have to sell. There's a lot of markets that kind of follow a similar pattern. Let's stay on this thread a bit, though. You said earlier that it would take you hours to like weeks to develop sales enablement materials. How do you measure what's happening? How do you train off of it? And now you're saying it could take 5 minutes. Like, what was the difference there? What were you going through as a sales enablement like leader before that now is being taken care of by a GPT that you created?
So I think there's two things because obviously you have, the GPT that can, produce content. So I can create a custom GPT that has all the information that I need. So we have one, for example, we use Raskin a little bit, we use Sandler, and we kind of put all of that into a GPT. And so when I want a calling scorecard, I just pop in, exactly what I'm specifically looking for. And then it's like, hey, build this out in the Sandler way or the Raskin way. So we're making sure that the methodologies that we're using are threaded throughout the enablement, trainings and whatnot that we're doing as well, or even the call scorecards. I think previously we didn't really have a way to kind of start this. So it was basically me, myself, and I staring at a blank piece of paper. And so that's why it took so long. So I think starting from nothing is way more difficult than starting from something that's actually like pretty okay. And then I'm just making little tweaks here and there. I've been in the world for a while, so I kind of know when it kind of just looks like ChatGPT language versus a human language. And that's where you can like insert a bit, they're not very good at empathy, let's say. So we can insert a bit of like the human element and the empathy. But then there's this whole other side where I'm getting really excited about, which is the agent side of things. And if we think about from enablement, and even I have my RevOps hat on as well, even into RevOps, I think this is where the two departments working together can be incredibly powerful. A lot of enablement people are measuring kind of vanity metrics, and I think a lot of them are not as data driven as our RevOps folks, right? So actually combining forces, having RevOps start pulling the data and then having the two departments look together at that data, you get this kind of like diversity of thought, which is incredibly powerful because the way that I would look at something versus somebody with a more financial data background is incredibly different, right? So we're looking at the same thing and we're seeing each other's blind spots. We might think of something that they didn't think of. And then we can start to figure out solutions like, here's what the data is saying. Here's where we need to improve. And here's some things that we can do. And we can work together on that. So enablement can focus on building out the processes. And instead of like the olden days where you kind of threw that process over the wall to sales reps, hoping to hell that they adopt it, you don't know if they're adopting it. And then usually it's not. Think about things like MedPick, right? Half the time people aren't filling out the CRM, they hate it. So how can we then leverage agents to start helping us to fill these things out, right? Get better data, actually drive these pieces of the sales process that are incredibly important and build the foundation for the rest. And so I think that's where we can really partner with the folks in RevOps to have like, enablement builds out the process and the documentation, and then RevOps aids, almost like a go-to-market engineer role. I know some of these are popping up here and there. We actually are very lucky that we have one in our team who are then thinking about this from an AI perspective, right? Like how do we enable them with the agents so that they don't have to do it themselves and it just gets embedded into the process automatically.
These are two phenomenal threads, and so I want to stick on the sales enablement thread and then come back to this data RevOps combination thread. So let's go down this path. You said that one of the biggest pickups in saving, like condensing, challenging like strategic work, let's say creating like scorecards that are actually valuable for your team that give you data and them feedback, right? Um, the time to do these really shrunk. Do you feel like it was more around the getting off the blank page that like really kind of condensed that time space? Or do you feel like it was actually that the LLMs were doing like what is the like hours of actual like writing and typing and thinking that was happening?
Really good question. I actually think it's both. So there's that piece, at least from my perspective. I know Warren, we've worked together. I love a whiteboard. Like I have to be in a like I think for me it's really helpful if I'm talking things out with somebody or whiteboarding something. And that's because you get off that blank piece of paper, and it's a really safe way of getting off that blank piece of paper. And that's how I would historically do it. I still do it like that today, but then I take those ideas and then put it into the LLM, which again gives you something that's not blank and probably then perpetuates that brainstorming where you're like, oh, I actually didn't think about that, or I didn't think about that. And then once you have the more solid idea, you're right. It is so time consuming. Like for example, I'm doing annual planning at the moment. And I'm thinking about, what am I working on with my team? What's our team charter look like? All of this stuff that, I mean, I could write it out. It's going to take me hours to write out. And it's not that difficult. I know what it needs to say more or less. But again, if I can plug that into an LLM that, I've trained and knows what our business looks like and what I'm trying to achieve, it can spit out something that's, pretty much good and save me hours on handwriting something like we would used to do that would take so long. And it's just not necessary, right? Like I can then focus on tweaking it to make it even better and exactly what I'm looking for versus spending the time on actually building the thing out. So it's more than I think you're then more focused on the actual strategic part versus the executing part that actually isn't the hard bit. I think the hard bit is thinking about that, that blue sky thinking, high level, and trying to figure out, what exactly you want to do versus doing the thing.
Let's get tactical in this space and see if we can leave like something helpful. Let's picture we're speaking to a sales enablement manager, usually a one man band in sales enablement. Unfortunately, for you guys, it's generally not a team of 8 that are constantly brainstorming on what enablement could be like. So one person wants to get off a white page with using AI, and I was like, listen, how can I use this better? Can you describe like a specific like thing that you've had to do in the past? Give me the 3, 4, 5 steps behind what you used to have to do, and then give us the 3, 4, 5 steps on what you can do now, including like the baseline setup. And option B, like how do you get a GPT up, for example, in this case? What did you pump into it? How did you create what you pumped into it? Can you give us the A and the B?
Yeah, I'm actually gonna do a slightly different example. So one that I actually talked about at a conference the other day. So one of the things that we want to look into next year, one of the challenges that we have is if you think about traditional enablement and and reps, right? One of their biggest gripes is training and training being generalized. And how do you make it so it's personalized for them? Well, most companies, what they do is they're like, oh, I'm going to make it personalized. I'm going to make it role specific. And it's like, cool. That's still not helpful. And so actually the other day we had 2 new joiners. One had a maritime background and one didn't. And in our industry, in maritime, like if you're selling into maritime, you have to be an absolute expert. And it's not just an overnight thing to get involved. It's incredibly deep. We have to do quite a lot of training around that. So those onboarding programs have to actually be incredibly different. So one of them needed tons of maritime experience, but actually had used all of our tools, all of our methodologies. Other one hadn't used any of our tools and methodologies, but he's been working in shipping for about 20 years. So this is like opposite. And I was trying to train them at the exact same time, and that is incredibly difficult. So we kind of fudged it together. And what we did was we basically just hand built these onboarding programs, by the way. So copy paste of all the things that were important and then deleted all the things that weren't important and kind of prayed that it would make sense. It still wasn't 100% perfect because there's slight variances in it. So maybe one of them, has used, let's say Gong, for example, before, but they haven't used Gong in our way. So how do you account for those kind of like really small niche things? And we didn't, by the way. So we just kind of ignored it and we're like, I hope this is going to be okay. Probably what's going to happen is it's going to come back and bite us later on. And we're going to have to do like a personalized session for this person at some point when it comes up. Now, here's what I think the future looks like. Because again, I think there's a lot of just spray and pray there. And we're just hoping that it lands or it does a good enough job. What I think the future looks like is a incredibly personalized onboarding program or even continuous learning program. So the other thing we haven't talked about is competency frameworks, but competency frameworks are incredibly lengthy to build out. A lot of times, it's literally having to either you steal something that somebody's already done and kind of make it work for your company, or you build it completely from scratch. Some people already have this, but they don't really know what to do with it. So they're manually measuring this and whatnot. So one of the things I want to look into is how can we actually plug this into a GPT and have our competency framework in there. We also use a company called OMG. So that's Objective Management Group. And every time someone joins our company, they take a test and that gives us their affinity for selling. And this pops out an entire seller profile, incredibly personalized, of everything that we need to know about their strengths, their weaknesses, and how we can actually help them. You plug that into the GPT. How about their role? Maybe their market, for example, and we can train the model to understand, what the different markets are for us. Like in Greece, the selling is very different than if we're selling in Dubai, for example, or in Singapore or in the Nordics. So how can we then train it and to understand that piece and whatnot? We can also then put in their deal momentum and their win-loss analysis and whatnot. And you put all of these things in a GPT. And by the way, it sounds like a lot of work. It's actually not that much work once you know what you're looking for. And what it can pop out is actually almost like one of those spider charts where you understand it, you get a really strong picture from not only like the soft skills piece, because that's what we think about competencies a lot of, not just the soft skills, but also some of these other skills, which is like deal momentum. Do they actually follow up on emails? What's their email sentiment? Are they good at calling? Or do they need help with that? We can actually get real life examples of what those are doing rather than kind of finger in the air. I think this person is good at this because, right? So you get that. And then you have a separate GPT where you have all of your sales trainings in. And by the way, you don't even have to have sales trainings. You can purchase like LinkedIn Learning and hook it up with something like that. So you don't even have to create these. So for teams of one, there's like really creative ways around this where you don't have to build out everything yourself. And you put that that seller profile into that, and it's now created an onboarding program for you specific towards that person. Or it creates a 6-month, program of like, we want to get this person to this next level. Here are the 4 things that they should be focused on between this performance cycle and the next performance cycle to get that promotion that they're looking for. So it's a really interesting way of like, you can do this with a person of one. And that takes out, I mean, probably a year's worth of work for yourself in having to like build out all of these and maintain them, because it's the maintenance that takes so long. So that was a very long-winded answer, but I think it was so exciting to think about that, because those are the things that like I love to build, but it's the maintenance that's absolutely terrible, Warren. It takes up it's a time suck, and it's not actually helping anybody, because it ends up getting poorly managed, and then people just stop using them at some point. So this is a great way of using AI to actually enhance the stuff that you're building and actually get it adopted as well.
It's a phenomenal process. And what it kind of begets to is like, so then let's pull that out. Something that gets under talked about is like voice AI in this space, right? So like we talk about conversational intelligence. I think that gets under talked about as well, but it gets talked about enough, right? Where it's like, great, in that scenario, in a perfect world, you're pumping all of the conversation that your teams are having, internal and external, into their GPT, and you're leveraging all of that context. Because why are we translating what was said into like just bullet points? Why don't we just push in the conversation? But if you think about it, right, like, and that OMG test is phenomenal, and I couldn't find myself replacing it. But for like the other things, let's say competencies, industry knowledge, these types of things, we should really be pushing the bounds on what the intake data there is. And like a voice agent would be great at this, right? So like have a conversation about maritime to tell me how much you truly know about maritime. And let's get really specific there. Even within maritime, I know that there's 4 or 5 different personas. Port agents talk a lot different than ship brokers, right? Cool. You're going to be in a ship broker's like territory, right? Like you walk into a room of ship brokers, they'll laugh at you if you don't speak to speak. Let's use a voice agent, have the conversation to actually do the competency scoring. Now you had like an agent pressing into answers and questions given by a rep, and all that becomes the framework. You could do this in like 3 or 4 different areas: pre-onboarding, pre-first day, maybe 3 30-minute conversations with an AI agent, and it would give you a ton of data to launch that training GPT. And then you take the OMG test and you come to a common understanding with the rep of what is that like 3, 6, 9, 12, 18-month progression look like for them. So I think there's an opportunity to do data capture, especially in the beginning there, with a voice agent rather than a spreadsheet. A really fascinating kind of process there.
I love it, and it's music to enablement people's ears, because I'm not speaking for everybody in enablement, but I know a lot of enablement people who are scared of spreadsheets, including myself, although I've in the RevOps side of things, I've had to get better at it. So something that's not a spreadsheet and it's taken out of that is a massive win for us, and definitely speaks our language.
You can also take that scenario, right? Like you're trying to figure out, is this rep strong in price negotiation, right? Maybe you create a price negotiation voice agent, right? How does that work now? ONG's secret sauce is they're really good at asking several questions in a way that you can't game the system. They're going to figure out if you're good at it or not. You have to be a psychopath to game that system, right? But if you had a voice agent that was asking you questions, asking about past examples, looking for key items, maybe running a mini negotiation here. If I said this, what would your response be? You get a lot of like a lot of the LMG answers are like, would you do this? Yes, no, maybe, right? Like so, like let's get out of the yes, no, maybe, and let's take the context from a discussion. Would be a really fascinating way to kind of run like enablement. Voice agents might be a really cool spot to insert in this.
It. I'm
Yeah,
gonna I'm
easy
gonna
to
go
spin
go
up
off.
too. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm gonna go off and talk to my team member for maybe put it on the roadmap for
I
H2.
know. Well, I say like I want to hop off this and just start a piece of software that does all of this for enablement reps. All right, cool. So we're coming up on time. I'm glad we really focused on this. Let's. I don't want to leave. I want to leave with two topics. I don't want to leave this thread unpulled. That. Tell me about the combination of sales enablement and RevOps. I'll be specific. Why do you think it works so well now? But why didn't we do it in the past if it worked so well now?
Think that realistically, and maybe some people would disagree with me, but I think we're entering a new world here where we're going to operate incredibly lean on the sales side, and we're going to probably have more inflated teams on the enablement and the RevOps side. And the reason I'm saying this is because of the roles of things like go-to-market engineers who are going to be tasked with building out these agents and all of the ways that they can support sales so that actually sellers can do so much more with their time because they're not focused on, oh, hey, did I follow up with that email? No, actually, an agent just told me to follow up on it, have already drafted the email and tell me exactly what I should put in that based off of past conversations, right? Like, so all of these really just simple tasks are automated for us. Same with prospecting, account research, account prioritization, territory planning. All of this stuff can be automated. So all the sales rep needs to do is a highly strategic human kind of intervention things, right? Negotiation, you know, empathy, building the relationships, and almost acting as kind of like the puppeteer and managing that whole process. So I'm thinking about it as more like sales reps are going to be kind of the orchestrator, almost like the conductor of the sales deal with all of these things running behind in the background. And that support team is going to need to be quite large to be able to support that, to be able to have incredible data to make sure that any of the AI stuff that we're working on is actually functioning correctly, to build out, any of these like specialized GPTs to manage the tech stacks, to make sure that they're all talking together and the agents are working well with them. So it's a really different world, but I also think it works so well together because enablement has a lot of blind spots and RevOps has a lot of blind spots. So RevOps is incredible at creating these really data-driven processes. So understanding like, okay, cool, here's the issue, here's the process we need to do based off of the data. And then I'm going to follow up and be able to measure that whether or not that process works, right? What they're not good at is thinking about the human interface of how do people actually adopt it. And so that's where the change management piece comes in, and people with more of that like enablement profile can really support RevOps in these processes, and vice versa, because enablement doesn't always have that data-driven background to understand where it's coming from. They don't know how to pull the reports or analyze that data. So I think it's such a perfect marriage of skills and that kind of thought diversity that I talked about earlier. And that's where we're starting to see huge strides in our team. And I'm starting to hire on this as well. So making sure that, we're about a team of 6 and all of us have a really different skill set, but they complement each other really well. So every time we're rolling something out, I might be rolling something out and all of them can notice what my blind spots are and vice versa. And I think that's so important because we all have them, right? We all have biases, we all have blind spots. And getting someone to be able to call them out versus an enablement team with all identical skills, we might miss those and we might miss the mark. And I've been there before and I've missed the mark before because nobody caught them. So yeah, I think this is the way that we're gonna move in the future.
It's awesome. I had a recent conversation where someone talked about how we have been for decades talking about like breaking down silos and crossing functions. The thing is that like uh, I never thought of it this way. It's a bit of a misnomer. Silos exist for a reason, right? Like there's different functions that have different skill sets and different goals, right? So breaking down silos was like, all right, let's meld everything together. Well, that's not really the right approach, right? Like finding the right operators to cross silos along the way is the way to push it, right? Like the silos exist for a reason. But in this scenario, there seems like there's a lot of synergy between the two roles that maybe there was an artificial silo, right? Like the goals are the same, right? Like train and measure, right? So like let's combine the two and put it together. Great. Well, one last question. What's like a hot take or unpopular opinion you have about AI in sales, just in general?
That's a really good question. Um, I feel like it might be a bit of a controversial one, but I think there's going to be some pretty big shifts. So I talked about the RevOps and enablement shift, but I think on the sales side, I think there's going to be a pretty big shift when we think about roles like BDR, SDRs, MDRs, so those doing inbound, and mid-market SMB account executives and enterprise account executives. So inbound, by the way, could probably be completely automated. We're actually looking into trying to figure out how to do this ourselves. Um, up until the time where they enter a deal cycle and they need to speak with a human. Um, SDR, BDR, there's so much of their role that actually can be automated. That we're actually at our company starting to think about BDRs in a different way. So we're actually moving them from they were working historically on SMB and mid market, also a little bit of enterprise, but it was a mix. And we're actually having them exclusively focus on enterprise. Those really complex deals that are hard to get into. You need to map stakeholders. You really need to understand their business in order to break into that account. And so we're moving them and using their brains for that and training them how to do the more strategic stuff. In their other time, we're actually using them across the go-to-market team in areas where we might need different support, additional support. So for example, two of our BDRs actually recently went to a customer. So they've been trained up on how to train a trainer and teach people how to use our platform. And they've gone to a customer and spent 2 days at the customer. So not only do they sit with a customer, they're now training them, they're understanding what their challenges are, they're seeing it in real life, and now they can bring all of that back to their BDR life. So it's like this really great circle, I think, and how we're leveraging them in a different way. So that's the MDR BDR side. Now, if you look at AEs and as a whole, I think that mid market SMB, I think so much of it could be automated. To be honest, it's a lot of more like especially if you think about like transactional sales, like so much of it can be automated that you probably don't need mid market BDRs. Those mid-market AEs or SMB AEs, they should just be driving their own pipeline because again, so much of it can be automated. So it's a completely different skill set than we've ever seen before. And then you look at enterprise who, again, we talked about the BDRs, how we're changing those a little bit. They might have BDR support and they're just thinking about, how do we go to market in a more strategic way? How am I managing all of the resources that we have? So again, being that almost like conductor at the front of the room, conducting all of the people that you need to get an enterprise deal over the line with some elements of automation and AI along the way, right? Because there has to be some stuff that we can automate even at an enterprise level. But I think those two roles are going to be completely different skill sets that we're going to look at with completely different support and different uses of AI. So that's my hot take. I think some people would disagree with me. And it's not that we're replacing BDR's jobs. I think it just is going to change slightly, what those look like. And they're actually going to become even more strategic than those kind of appointment setters that we see in some companies today, which I personally think is a good thing because I think it makes the role a lot more fun.
Yeah, talk about breaking down silos, and then really the crystallization of selling as a team sport there. That's great. Molly, this fantastic conversation. Tell us, have you done any like roundtables recently that we should look out for any content? You got anything scheduled coming out?
So I actually just was at a conference the past 2 days. So I actually did a roundtable. It was on change management, which was really interesting. I think sadly not recorded, but I'm definitely looking into doing some other podcasts and whatnot in the future because this is so fun. And I think it gives you just some time to reflect and think about, some of the trends that are going on and take it back, to your own team and your own thinking, especially at the end of the year when I'm starting to plan. And I just think it pulls you out of that every day. Oh, just keep doing what I'm doing, right? And helps us innovate a little bit. So I love doing these things and looking forward to whatever's next.
I really appreciate you taking the time. Phenomenal conversation, specifically around how you set up, let's say, a GPT infrastructure. Absent of I didn't hear all the software you bought to do these types of things. Get off a blank page, load your information into a GPT, make it personalized truly rather than persona based. Outcomes are exponentially better. So phenomenal advice for sales enablement teams out there. Appreciate you taking the time, Molly.
Thanks for having me, Warren.